that.
Does anybody else have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say like masculinity is like kind of just it's just associated with a lot of like I don't want to say olden time things, but like pretty much I would say it goes down to like the Stone Age where men are breadwinners, hunting and gathering and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, when masculinity is like being questioned, um, male figures will probably feel like less than or belittled because they're not fulfilling this make believe standard that shouldn't really exist anymore because men can do a million and one things, women can do a million and one things if they put their mind to it.
I would say it's how should I? It depends, like obviously I guess who's performing masculinity. I think for most men it comes with this assumption of having to take care of things and dress a certain way and speak a certain way. And I would say a lot of the times, I guess toxic masculinity more specifically is like kind of also asserting your sexuality for a lot of men and being attracted to the opposite sex and like, you know, I guess flaunting if you are I guess doing well at that, like if you you know, having to over exaggerate like that you are attracted to women, for example, for a lot of men and stuff like that, I would say that also kind of contributes to how masculinity is performed.
When I think about masculinity, I think about, tell me if you guys remember this, like this big buff guy kicking sand on this little puny guy sitting next to a girl on a blanket at the beach. And, you know, like he's some big masculine dude and he has to like, you know, put that out there or whatever. And this is just my opinion and I'm a lot older than you guys, but when the feminist movement started way back in the 60s, when I was born, I think it kind of displaced men at that point. Masculinity had a certain definition or whatever up until that point. I mean, from the time, you know, humanity started until that point, that was a long time. And then all of a sudden, everything flipped. And I think it displaced men. And I think it still displaces men. I don't think they know where they belong anymore. I mean, you know, I don't think they subscribe to, I don't know how to put it. Not that they should subscribe to a definition, but I think they just don't know what to make of things anymore. It seems like a lot of men just stopped being a provider and stopped being the things that had been associated with that definition up until that point. So, you know, I mean, I don't know. Is that a good thing, a bad thing, or you know, I don't really know. I guess we can consider it later.
I think I can see where you're getting at because I took a communication class that dealt with like cross-cultural communication and how to navigate that sort of thing. And we talked about how men today, specifically, I think they were talking about millennials since Gen Z still was basically just turning 18 at that point. that millennial men were like outsiders to men at to men of previous generations, because a lot of millennial men were more willing to be stay-at-home dads while the mother goes out to work. And I think my professor was probably part of like Gen X or something like that. And he asked a majority of us, oh, so since there's a nice even mix of you guys, what do you guys think? Is there anything wrong with a dad being a stay-at-home dad while the mom goes out to work? Me personally, I see no problem with it. I would love to stay home with my kid if I had the chance to. In a perfect world, there would be an opportunity to do both if I so choose, have a little bit of work and then also be able to uh, care for my child as much as they need for the time that they need it. But also at the same time, there are still people that think that it is the man's place, no matter what anybody says, that they are supposed to go out and work and provide for the family. So things are changing, but I'm not sure where they will change to and how much they will change.
And did you understand what I was getting at? That like when it sort of started flipping, though, I mean, you know, like if you look at the shows, TV shows, and how families were portrayed and this and that, like in the 40s, 50s, whatever, you know, it was always like a nuclear family unit. The dad went out to work, the mom stayed home and baked and blah, 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 whatever. And then everything flipped. But then, like, nobody was getting married, you know, women were getting pregnant. The guys were just like, you know, who's the father? Men were running off. And like, it was just like chaos for like a while. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, we don't know what to do anymore. We don't know, like, we're all like confused because like all of a sudden women were gaining all this power and men didn't know, like, you know, what's my role anymore? What's my place? Where do I fit into this picture? And I think that lasted for like a pretty long time. And I think really that you're right, Kai, like that it really hasn't started, it really didn't start settling down again until maybe this generation, until like kids that were born in the late 90s, early 2000s and started taking, you know, their side, yeah, like their, you know, like started feeling comfortable in like a new role, in like a not having to have that, you know, like masculine definition put on them or whatever. So, yeah, I think your teacher's right with that. Your professor.
I don't want to spend too much time on just one topic because I know we're just getting started with the presentation, Alexa, but
No worries.
I'm just like listening to all of this and like it's just fun because for me, I just always at the back of my mind I have to think like how does like queerness complicate that, like these domestic dynamics where it's not necessarily a man and a woman, and therefore like where do masculinity and femininity and exist in those spaces, and like how that can also make people uncomfortable and feel the need to kind of assign masculinity somewhere and femininity of course as a result. But yeah, just thinking about also how like non-men perform masculinity and how maybe there might be less demands on them because they're already like existing in a space that already by default doesn't conform to gender norms, and so maybe that masculinity is not performed in the same way. So yeah, that's just some thoughts floating around in my head.
All right, if you want to go to the next slide. All right, so in the beginning of this documentary, I don't know if anybody has seen it, but they started off by, they asked a bunch of kids from all different age groups, all different backgrounds, you know, if you really knew me, you would know that. And it was pretty much a very similar answer that went around. Some kids said, I feel like an outsider at school. When I'm having a bad day, it's sometimes hard to find somebody to talk about it. When I'm sad, I don't really say anything. You know, I can't be myself. I feel alone, and that's a common trend. It seems like from all ages, like from all groups of kids that, you know, are told when they're younger, you know, this is the expectation of being a man, and then having to hide your feelings, hide your emotions, not being able to talk about it, and as a result, it affects them in so many different ways, you know, in school, with their friends, at home, and it seems like it's definitely a problem. So, like I said, this starts definitely in childhood development. Um, Boys are taught the assumptions of manhood definitely through popular culture, parenting styles, education styles, and then its effects, you know, definitely show socially and emotionally. The rates, and I will talk about this later on in the presentation, I mean, the rates for suicide and dropout school rates are just so much higher for boys than they are for girls. And it's just because when they're younger and they don't have people to talk to about their emotions and what they're feeling, it builds up and then it just kind of just explodes. I'm not sure if anybody's had experience personally with that or if they know somebody who may have, but it's definitely an issue in school. Boys have a very hard time focusing in the classroom, um, and it definitely impacts how they learn, for sure. In the video, they had said when they're younger, this starts probably from childhood and then just expands into adulthood, but they are told 3 lies. And for the most part, this could definitely vary from culture to culture and from age groups and whatnot and, you know, backgrounds. But for the most part, boys are taught the association between masculinity and athletic ability, masculinity and economic growth and success, and masculinity and sexuality. I think those are some of the main points that they make to kids. I mean, especially with sports. I mean, you could see so many little boys are told, you know, oh, you want to play football, soccer, baseball. And when they get older, they learn, oh, I don't really like sports. I don't think I have to play them. And then they feel uncomfortable when they find things like art and theater and things that they weren't exposed to when they were younger. And they're kind of told, like, oh, you can't do that because that's feminine. Like, that's not a masculine trait or a masculine hobby. And when they grow up, they aren't themselves, you know? And I'm sure you guys have definitely seen that, like, in school for sure. So one of the speakers had said by the age of 5, he's taught that it's not okay to cry in public. He may still cry, but the expectation is that by the age of 10, he's perfected it. And if he's 12 and still doing it, there's a problem. I'm sure, I know my brother for a fact, he doesn't ever show emotion. And I think that definitely has affected him. He's 16 years old now. I don't think my parents necessarily had said, hey, you can't cry. I don't think it was that enforcing, but I think, you know, he didn't really have an outlet and then he had an issue in high school. So, and I'm sure a ton of other boys, adolescents, and even adults, I'm sure this impacts them in so many ways. So I thought that was a very important quote because that is what, you know, a lot of boys learn in childhood, starting from the age of 5, and you know what, sometimes even younger.
One of the things that came up in my study has to do with the mean team, which was a team created by the boys for the purpose of acting against the girls. This was a pre-kindergarten class. In the beginning, there was a little bit of intermixing, but then by December of that first year, the boys versus girls dynamic had become clear, and even the hierarchy among the boys had become clear. They'd had these rules and these ways of being and these ways of engaging each other and behaving. One of the rules was that they couldn't play with the girls. And if you broke those rules, you could be fired and technically not be a boy anymore. One of the boys told me, I'm actually friends with all the girls. I actually like the girls. But if Mike, the leader of the mean team, finds out, then he'll fire me from his club, and then I won't have a club. They totally understand, like, kind of, these are the rules, and then these are the consequences for their status among the boys.
I like that video a lot because I just know from experience, I definitely saw that in elementary school. I never really thought about it, I guess, until, I got older and matured and kind of noticed that there was, the boys and then the girls. I would see it all the time on the playground. You'd see it in the lunchrooms. You see it in group activities in the classroom. There's just such a divide. And when I was younger, I remember definitely I saw things like, boys making fun of girls, like, oh, like, you know, you play with dolls, like, ew, like, you know what I mean? Like, and that's something, again, that, like, they learn when they're younger, when parents give them toys. It's guys are given the action figures and girls are given the Barbie dolls, instead of letting them kind of choose what they want to play with. And I think that carries through with them. Did anybody have, like, anything that they wanted to share about any personal experiences, or things that they have seen in their elementary schools and or middle schools and such?
Well, when I was watching the video, I thought it was like kind of interesting how they already kind of form these groups at such a young age, and they're expected to act a certain way or not talk to like a certain type of person. And I can only imagine like how hard that is as a kid to not like be able to talk to a friend that's a girl, or talk to a friend that's maybe not in the clique but isn't a part of the group. And like you can only imagine how that kind of just gets bigger and bigger as you grow up. Like you might not have such like a tight-knit group telling you, oh, you're supposed to do this thing, but society is definitely there, and that still has an impact. So it's like even at a young age they're like in these small groups, but as it gets older it's kind of like, oh, it's you against the world, even if no one's explicitly telling you, oh, you can't talk to that person, or you can't be this way, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, definitely.
It's kind of
Well,
interesting. Oh, I'm sorry.
you can go ahead.
Okay. It's kind of interesting because I feel like it's very different in my experience for girls when we're little, because if you're a girl who can get along with the guys, it's some street cred. Like you get clout for that. Like you can hang out with the guys and the girls that, like, that's good for you. But I guess, for boys it's like, you want to hang out with the girls? That's weird. And I guess it just speaks to this fear of being feminine, and how, like, if a girl wants to act a little masculine and hang around boys, that's encouraged, because men, I guess it traces back to this idea of like penis envy and like wanting, striving for some semblance of manhood because that's supposed to be superior. But yeah, it just doesn't work the same way for boys and young men who show any kind of femininity, I guess.
That actually transitions perfectly into the next slide. So that's good that you mentioned that.
Okay. I know Kai wanted to say something.
Yeah, for sure.
Similar to you, Melanie, in my personal experience, sort of have a dual aspect where, as far as I remember it like very distinctly that one of my only and closest friends was a girl in preschool. In kindergarten, I had a couple guy friends that were close, but I always found some girl that I was friends with, and I don't remember being teased about something like that. But at the same time, that acculturation into, masculinity still happened, because I do remember making fun of my little cousin for picking up dolls, but at the same time, I was playing with dolls when I was about the age that I wound up making fun of him at. So I value the those close friendships I had growing up that sort of never got me too close or over the edge of going from like just being a normal person to valuing masculinity the way that a lot of people do.
All right. So, like Melanie had said, the rejection of femininity is definitely a prominent thing seen in boys starting from childhood to adulthood. And there are many studies and, psychologists that have found that men do overcompensate when their masculinity is threatened. Some sources call this like the true man myth, where you have to dress a certain way, you have to act a certain way, certain mannerisms, you need to be tough and just the things that you say, and when their masculinity is threatened, it's just like a immediate response to just kind of, show that they're not feminine and avoid the consequences of somebody else thinking like, oh, that was, that could be gay, which is another issue with the ever-present homophobia, where guys are afraid like of associating with somebody, and not necessarily associating, but maybe having similar interests or being feminine. You can be feminine and not be gay, and I think that that's a very hard distinction for some guys to make. Like, they don't necessarily realize that, oh, because I dress maybe a little bit feminine, or I'm into theater and art, like that is not something that is homosexual. Like, that's something that you're into, that's a hobby, that's there's nothing wrong with that. And they struggle to understand that there shouldn't be a balance between masculinity and femininity. You can be both. Like, that is not, like, there's no one or the other. They overlap, and that's just a normal natural thing in human nature.
Yeah, I think it's so present in our culture that I think at least once a month there's some meme that goes around where somebody has a hot take about, I don't like it when guys wear glasses. Like, what are they trying to say? And then somebody replies like, oh, now do we think it's gay to wear glasses? It's gay to see. Things like that. Where literally every tiny, minute detail of a guy's life needs to be in check and conforming to this idea that honestly is just an idea that doesn't really need to be gatekept the way it is.
Definitely. I have this friend, actually, he's super into rock. He plays guitar, that's his thing. And he painted his nails black, and he was super into it, and he showed his parents, and his parents were like, you need to take that off immediately. Like, that doesn't fly in this household. And he was really upset. I mean, he told me about it, and he was like, I'm not taking it off. Like, I shouldn't have to. And I'm sure a ton of guys have very similar experiences with that.
Yeah, I mean, my best friend is gay, and he always had to, he would have his boyfriend paint his nails, and then like by the end of the day before he had to go back home, he'd have to take it off anyways, just because, like, obviously his nails being painted don't mean that he's gay, just because I mean, like, they're, what's the word, they're not like they are mutually exclusive, like one doesn't connect to the other. It's just like he happens to like to paint his nails and he also happens to be gay. But because those two things are so tied together and like his parents are homophobic, he, you know, it's just not something he can show off. So, yeah.
In the household that I grew up in, there was a lot of physical abuse. My father used to beat my mother pretty horrifically from my recollection. My father sold drugs, and that's how he made his living. He was in and out of prison my entire childhood. In fact, I think he was gone the first 2 years that I was born, so I didn't even really get to establish that connection that most young boys get to establish with their father. In middle school, it was extremely difficult to deal with because I didn't know what it meant to be a man. Like, I did not have a father figure in my life. I just had strong women. I was bullied a lot growing up because I'm not the most masculine of men. I never have been. Why am I ostracized and treated different? Because I don't want to fight. Because I don't see the point in having rampant, unprotected sex with uncountable women and then sitting here and boasting about it over booze and smoking a joint. And yet that's what society deems as masculine. I don't value that. And I think it's because I still am so close to my mom and to my grandmother, and they're both extremely strong and respectable, not only women, they're respectable people. And so that's to me is what I wanted to emulate. In the household.
I think that perfectly sums up, you know, the discussion with being feminine and being a guy. You know, you don't have to fight. You don't have to boast about your sexual conquests. You know, that's not masculine. That's just a socially constructed definition of masculinity. But how have societal or cultural experiences impacted your idea of masculinity? And if not directly you, is there anybody who has definitely struggled with their cultural expectations, either masculine or feminine?
I know my best friend, he's into theater, but his parents are Caribbean and where he's specifically from, like they're like really homophobic, and sometimes his family like tends to not accept the fact that does things like theater and perform because it's not seen as masculine.
I know when I cut my hair short, my mom had a fit because short hair is supposed to be masculine. And yeah, I went to a barber shop. I was like, I don't really care as long as my hair looks good. That's really all that matters. And then I came home and she's like, you look like a boy. And I'm like, okay. That's not really the point. And she's calling me right now. She hears me talking about her. But yeah, no, that's definitely a big association, like the length of your hair, like silly things like that. So I've definitely gotten heat for that a little bit. But I mean my family's not used to it, but I got a little bit of heat in the beginning about cutting my hair very short because, you know, that supposedly is supposed to make me less feminine. But yeah, I guess that kind of applies.
I have never really cared much for the uh, toxic masculine culture. It always weirded me out to a degree. And as I got older, it just started making less and less sense to me why people want to gatekeep themselves like that and gatekeep others from living their life and doing what they want to do. Similar to your friend Alexa, I actually recently painted my nails, started doing that. A couple people were just shocked that I did it. And then I did have a couple people ask why I did it, which was a little confusing for me, but also at the same time, I sort of expected it. So I can imagine that something like that on a much larger scale, where people are questioning sexuality and maybe even questioning their gender, just questioning in general who they are, could be difficult when small questions like that could just basically be an attack on who you are, just because they don't understand that you are who you are, and what small little details you do in your life don't really add up to such drastic changes where like your entire concept of yourself is attacked.
Yeah, and it's really funny just because, you know, people assume like you can't, some people, more like small-minded people think, you know, you can't be a woman and be masculine sometimes and vice versa. You can't be a man and be feminine sometimes. But like, what is that all tied to? I mean, even biologically, we are not one thing or the other. Like, there is science behind, you know, we all have like certain genetics that make even sex, you know, biological sex on a spectrum. No one is 100% male or female. You know, there are intersex people, and then for the rest of us in between, like, we all exist on a spectrum, and people just assign your biological sex based on which one you adhere more closely to. So it's, you know, it's just silly. It's way more fluid than people would like to portray socially.
Definitely. I don't want to cut anybody off, but there are a couple more slides. All right, so in the education system, like I had said before, boys are 2 times more likely than girls to flunk out or drop out of school, to receive special education. They're 4 times more likely to be expelled. And shockingly, I didn't know this, only 22 states require public schools to teach sex education, which I think is important. And, you know, I'm taking a gender issues in education right now. And there was one topic that we had discussed with the education system, and the sex education curriculum is actually so unbelievably like kind of corrupt, in all honesty. You know, like, they're not really teaching you the important parts of sex education that we should be learning in terms of gender and sexuality, positive sex. You know, of course they talk about, you know, the negative and the consequences and things like that, but I feel like they definitely overlook important factors of sexual harassment, sexual assault, you know, the really important things that we should be learning, both boys and girls, you know. And I didn't include this on here, but it also said that boys have a much higher rate for suicide. Alcohol and drug dependence and addiction is a big one. And it's because, you know, boys in the educational system, as well as, you know, their home situations, they're not, they don't give them chances to talk about what's going on and what they're, you know, what they're feeling, and then it just shows, and they act out in the classroom or the playground, or they have a hard time focusing, and it's really awful. The next video, there's a speaker that discusses it a little bit in more depth.
And we're seeing clearly that boys who come from low-income families, and when I say boys, I mean white boys as well, are less likely to go to college, more likely to drop out of school. In most schools, we start with humiliation as a way to punish kids, write the name on the board, put them in the back of the room, send them out. We rarely stop and ask, what's behind the behavior problem? Why is this child acting out? Denying those kids learning time actually has the effect of pushing many of them right out of school.
They will kick a kid out of school knowing that a kid who isn't reading by the 4th grade is gonna be in the prison system. Well, you kicked him out twice in the 3rd grade because he did this to his teacher. Ain't nobody in that child's life ever hugged me.
Go into a kindergarten class
You talking about boys, watch, they're doing this. Ask them a question. They can't shut up. They're jumping up and down, waving their hands. All right. Going to the same class when they're in the sixth grade. Ask them a question. What do you think? I don't know. Whatever. It's cool. In those 5 years, the academic pilot light has started to go out because they have decided that school is not the place for them. The number one predictor of student achievement is the expectations of the staff. The school system just said now that they didn't believe in the kids. In fact, because they were black and brown kids, they didn't think they could do well.
Everybody has potential if they're provided with the right support and the right stimulation.
All right, and masculinity in the media. We definitely see this, whether it's television, video games, ads, news articles, even Disney. I put Tarzan on there because, that's a movie that boys are shown when they're younger. It's this big honking character, and, he's looked at like a successful figure of masculinity. And although I wouldn't say, yeah, I mean, I guess I could say like the media definitely does affect some behavior in the sense, not necessarily, somebody sees violence in a video game and they're like, oh, this is perfect, this is acceptable. But I think like they look at these figures like, this is how I should be. Like I should be this dominant force because, the guy on the magazine looks like that. And, that's the same thing with girls as well. You see all these, like in the art, the ad covers and stuff of these bodies that are just not natural. Nobody's body really looks like that. And people think this is a standard. This is my expectation when it's really not. And these images that we constantly see in the media, on television, you name it, it reinforces the stereotypical structures of what it is to be a man and a woman. And then this next video, I thought this was probably one of the most important scenes in the entire documentary, and you guys are going to see why.
This is my high school. I graduated from this high school. I never wanted to be a teacher. I was going to be an engineer and make a lot of money. I became a teacher because I saw that my community was hurting without good teachers. And I think one of the biggest challenges was that, like, I've been through it, right? And so I want them to be able to know that they can move forward and they can succeed and they can do whatever they choose to do in life, but it's going to take hard work. If you go 2 blocks away, you'll find prostitution. There's a lot of gang activity in the area. I consider it like a war zone, right? Our kids get up every morning. They have to prepare their mask for how they're going to walk to get to school. So if that mask requires me not to let people see any of my vulnerabilities, that means I'm going to have to put on a very tough mask. And when I get here, hopefully I can take the mask off so I can focus on learning rather than continually wearing this hard shell. A lot of our students don't know how to take the mask off. So I want you to take one of these masks, take the mask. Here's what we're gonna do. On this mask, you're gonna draw what represents you. What are some things that you hold up every day when you walk to school that you let people see? And then on the back, I want you to write, what is it you don't let people see? Like, what's behind the mask? All right? Oh, yeah. What else? So what I want you to do is I want you to take your mask and I want you to ball it up. I want you to hit someone across the circle with your mask. Don't leave your seat. Don't leave your seat. You can't leave your seat. Open it up. Okay. So who wants to reveal what's on the mask they open? Read it out loud, just the front.
Funny, caring, and happy.
Okay. What's behind the mask?
Sadness and fear.
Sadness and fear. Goofy, kindness, happiness, silliness, smile, and fun. Okay. On the back. Anger. Anger. Okay. I'll read mine. The front says entertainment. That's what I show on the mask. On the back says pain.
Energy, frustration, happiness, friendly, heart, smile, outgoing. And on the back it says sadness, scared, tears, missing my dad, trying to take care of my brothers, and pain.
Why do you think we hold back our pain?
People don't want everybody to know everything. You gotta keep your poker face on. Can't let them know what you got.
How hard is that to walk around every day with the poker face on? It's not just an activity on paper. It's about real stuff that we are dealing with as young men that we hide behind because we don't feel safe. Almost 90% of you had pain and anger on the back of that paper. That's not a coincidence. That is real. And we're only 8 here. There are hundreds of young men out there that are having the same experience, but they don't have anybody to talk to about it. They're holding back sadness, they're holding back pain, they're holding back anger because they have nobody who is even asking them, what's up with you, man? What's happening? What's going on? How can I support you? I want each of you to be able to say what you need to say, because if we're ever going to dig down to the deepness of our pain, young men, if we're ever going to dig down to the anger that we're holding behind, so we don't end up another man in jail because we just exploded on the wrong person for the wrong thing, we got to have a safe place to deal with it. That's brotherhood.
For many of our boys who are trying to find what it means to be a man, and far too many without a man guiding them, they begin to define their own sense of what it means to be a man. Our boys are yearning for help, yearning for guidance and mentorship and leadership.
I know we're running out of time, but does anybody have any thoughts about that video? Because I really liked that one. Then we can get to a discussion question.
I thought it was pretty powerful, and yeah, it definitely is very telling about what some young men are too afraid to show because of what is expected of them.
Right. And how did masculinity come to be so important? Like, how does it perpetuate patriarchy?
I would say in part just because of what Judy and Melanie were talking about earlier, with just how people like to maintain the status quo, and then also just not really knowing what to do because men aren't given the opportunity to figure that out, where they don't know what a life without these rules set for them would take them. They don't understand what life would be like, and trying to find that out is a lot more risky and potentially embarrassing or whatever other thing could be going on for them than actually just trying it out and seeing what could become of sharing your feelings, or not holding back your tears and only crying like 5 times a year, things like that.
And does
Someone
oh, sorry.
commented in the chat referring to the school to prison pipeline, how this could easily escalate to a young man going to prison because of an outburst at the wrong time. I agree with that. And also, obviously, you know, how with the expectations set by teachers and kind of only seeing the mask and not thinking about what might be going on behind it. Because not all teachers are as compassionate as the one we saw in the video, and they tend to just expect to, you know, throw assignments and information at kids and just get it spit back out at them, without really having a cultural understanding of what the kids are going through and how that might be affecting their daily lives and their school performance. So you're really just setting them up for failure by telling them, you know, you can't really do any better than this.
I don't know, we're over time just by a minute, but if anybody can stay like just a minute longer, does anybody think that the benefits kind of weigh more than the disadvantages of masculinity?
I don't know if I necessarily have an answer to that. I actually like made that question, but I was really looking forward to hearing other people's thoughts on it, because you know, these notions of masculinity were kind of made to uplift men more than women, I think. But yeah, it is obviously, it does put everybody at a disadvantage, and we see how, you know, it's frustrating for men and women both to kind of not be able to be more fluid in how they express themselves and so on and so forth. But at the same time, men are still praised for their roles and being masculine, hyper masculine. So in a way, like, it does kind of benefit them when we think about stuff like maybe the workplace and things like that. So those are my kind of initial thoughts.
I kind of agree with what you're saying, Melanie. Like, I feel like if you were to look at it from just like a very like streamlined point of view, like I still benefit from like just in terms of money or like opportunities that other people would die to have. But at the same time, it's kind of just like, is it worth it to have all these things if you're not really who you are, who you're portraying? Like, if you're still suffering internally and mentally, like, is the money and like the power worth it if you're not really, you know, who you are? Like, if you're still living in the mask all the time, like, is that really the position that you would want to be in?
Right.
Yeah, I kind of like agree with what both of you are saying, because even though there are benefits, their mental health is deteriorating like slowly but surely, because that mask is double-sided, just as the video was showing. Like, one side is this success, this money, this physical attributes, all these things that kind of like just hype a person up, and everybody likes to be hyped up. Everyone likes to enjoy their pride and stuff, but at the end of the day, when you go home and you have to look at yourself in the mirror, you see the stress and the burden that you have to carry all the time.
Definitely.
Well, and somebody, please look it up. Don't men suffer from strokes and heart attacks and high blood pressure and things like that more than women?
To a degree, yeah. I think also it might be a by race breakdown. Like when Alexa talked about the suicide rates, I took psychology of death and dying, and the studies showed that white men are more likely to. They're not a lot of different races and genders attempt suicide at similar rates, but white men are more successful because they choose the deadliest methods.
Yeah.
And are more successful with those deadly methods because they just feel like they have the weight of the world on their shoulders. They feel like they have to provide for their family. They don't feel adequate in their jobs. They're not making enough money, things like that.
I'll tell you the truth. I know women who've tried to commit suicide, and I know men who've tried to commit suicide, and the men will do crazy things, like, you know, like stick a hose from their tailpipe into their car window, and, you know, things like that. They're serious. They, you know, like, women will just take a bunch of pills and hope that it happens, but, you know, men are like serious. when they think along those lines. So
And I was thinking that with how the patriarchy is set up and the fact that it benefits men of all different races in that special, unique way, men in general become blind to the fact that it disadvantages so many different people. When you have that privilege, you become blind to the possible disadvantages. Thank you, Julia. Bye.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, having privilege kind of blinds you to the disadvantages that it creates for other people, and purposely staying blind to it by perpetuating all of this sort of keeps the entire world blind, because there are some people who just would rather keep the status quo rather than try and find some way to make everybody on a more equitable field.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, everybody. That is what we have. I dropped in the chat if anybody's interested in actually seeing the full documentary. I put their website. It's called the representationproject.org. And you can just find a little bit more information about their mission. And I also put the Canopy website that our school offers, where you can just log in with your normal, school information, and you can actually watch the full duration if anybody's interested. So thank you, guys. And next week we're hosting our 10th anniversary party. Not our normal time at 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. So if anybody wants to, I don't know. Is it better?
last event of the semester.
Yeah.
Yep, we're having a little bit of a virtual happy hour. You can have whatever drink, alcoholic, non-alcoholic, and yeah, we're just gonna be hanging out. Maybe play some Kahoot. It'll be pretty fun. Yeah, our last hurrah for the semester. But otherwise, have a great Thanksgiving weekend, everyone. And thank you.
E-board, stay on for a few seconds.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Everybody stay safe.
Happy
Enjoy the weekend.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Oh wait, let me stop recording.